Hi guys and welcome back to another DrAce video, and today I'm going to show you how to improve your braking within MotoGP 24. My controller overlay will be on the right hand side of the screen. That is the DualSense controller. That is the controller I am using for today's video. Now my controls configuration are in the description below, so check those out if you have any discrepancies with the buttons I am using from the controller overlay. So ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy this video. I sincerely hope it helps. Let's crack on with the guide. So first things first, guys and girls, we need to understand how to brake properly within MotoGP 24. Now of course the braking is a fine art and it's not something you're going to learn overnight. It's going to take a lot of time to learn and understand, and it also depends on the track and the conditions as well. Best piece of advice I can give you is understanding the rider weight, the braking, how much force to apply, when to use the rear brake, and also when and how late you can brake. I think it takes a lot of time to understand this, but it will come within time. So picking a circuit like the circuit of Bud, the Indian GP, there's a lot of really hard braking zones, so this is a great track to learn. Learning and understanding that the fact that little points of the circuit can be used as references to brake at a certain point, and they will significantly help you. So the first thing I'm going to talk about here today is to focus on the left trigger, the L2 button on the PlayStation 5 controller. What I want you to notice is how much pressure gets applied during braking. And you should be able to see in almost all, if not all, the braking will never reach 100%. It might do once or twice depending on the situation and how desperate I am on the brakes, but to learn and understand the braking effectively, it is important not to hit the brakes too hard and lock the front. Now when the term lock the front is explained, it means that the front brake is pressed so hard that the tyre cannot move. The brakes will lock the tyre and the tyre is completely stuck and will not be able to move. Now the problem with this is that the bike cannot turn under braking. So by putting 80% of pressure on the L2 button, the front wheel will not lock and you still have that ability to turn in. Now don't get me wrong, you can lock the front if you are skilled at being able to still manage that feeling of the bike getting locked in one direction. Now how this can be achieved is by braking aggressively immediately, so the very hardest point of your braking, prime example will be the next corner upon this massive straight, you'll be able to hit the brakes extremely hard, lock the front, and then just reduce enough pressure as you then try to trail brake into the corner. Now trail braking is another term. As you can see, we went full brake there and we're actually able to get the bike stopped as the fact we've begun to trail brake. Now trail braking is getting closer towards the apex, which is the tight corner, the tightest point of that corner, and you reduce the brake as you progressively get to that apex. So by reducing the brake, it gives the bike a bit more stability, you're able to move it a little bit more. And on the opposite side, by braking too aggressively, the bike will be so stiff and it will not be able to turn, which will result in you dropping the front, i.e. a crash. So what I would recommend for all players to learn is to brake hard upon the initial impact of the braking and then reduce as you make the apex. You can also use the brake as a little bit of a tool to reduce the understeer. So if you find that I might be running a bit too deep, just use a bit of front brake, not aggressively, and it will cut that apex tighter for you. You will lose a bit of tyre wear for this, but you will ultimately get yourself closer to that apex. Now something you may have noticed throughout this video is the movement of the left analog stick. Now of course the left analog stick moves the bike left to right, but it also helps move the rider's weight. Now this is not a necessity, but it's something I implore players to learn and to try. You might not like it and therefore you don't need to use it, but for me, I find it to be very, very effective, and I've used it for multiple years of MotoGP computer games. So onto the brakes as we go on this long straight. When we get to the braking point, I am going to push the left analog stick backwards. Now when you move the analog stick backwards, the rider's weight gets shifted to the back of the motorcycle. Now the reason I do this is because if the weight is at the front of the motorcycle, you're going to find the bike will start to go onto its front end. What the term is a stoppie. So that means your bike's going to start doing an endo or a stoppie, the rear wheel is going to lift, and you lose traction and stability, resulting in a potential crash if you don't salvage that. Now I'm not saying the pushing backwards on the left analog stick fixes all of this and you can just make sure you brake perfectly every single time, but it's a worthy tool to get used to when pushing backwards on the analog stick to ensure that rear wheel is planted. We have the same effect for the analog stick going forwards out of the corner to push the rider's weight forward, so the rear wheel doesn't want to get all the power and the front wheel starts to lift off the floor. That technique has been working for me for years in MotoGP games, and it's a habit that I will never move from. I implore you to try it. As I say, it's not completely necessary. Some of the esports players don't even use the rider weight pushing forwards or backwards. It's just merely preference. If you try it and you hate it, don't worry about it. You can learn without. As long as all your skills are in that left trigger and the L2 button, you should be absolutely fine under braking. And before we move on to the next topic of today's braking guide, I would like to also bring your attention to the gearing under braking. Now if you're playing as automatic or semi-automatic gears, then you might not have to worry about this one too much, but for the players who are trying to learn manual, I would recommend taking your time with the downshifts. Now it is very easy to just think, go from 6th gear all the way down to 1st gear, tapping that button as quickly as possible should reduce the speed. That is not going to help. Aggressively downshifting too quickly will put way too much force and speed and inertia in the rear tyre that it's going to start sliding and getting out of hand. Be very careful with the use of the excessive downshifts. And also, before I mention as well, I'm going to take a look at this a little bit towards the latter stage of the video, but the rear brake is also very important within MotoGP 24. I'll show you basically the difference between overusing it and underusing it later, but for now I just wanted to bring attention to the rear brake as well, because of course we do have double brakes and separate brakes here in MotoGP 24. So now we're going to move across to the pit. We're going to use Fabio Di Gianantonio's VR46 camp for this particular guide. Now, I want to bring your attention to the different style of braking discs within MotoGP 24. I will have a different style to you, and you will have a different style to someone else. Not everyone has got the exact same styles when it comes to these computer racing games. So bring yourself over to the brakes part of the pit, and in here you will see the option of using the front brake and the rear brake discs. The front brake discs, you have a smattering of them to choose from. I recommend you to try every single brake disc here to figure out what works best for you. Some of these brake discs works extremely well for the more heavy-handed, aggressive brakers, and some for the opposite, the more calm, relaxed Jorge Lorenzo style of brakers. And also, each one being a different size will cool and heat up in different ways. So ladies and gentlemen, try out these brake discs. I can't recommend one for you to use. I would just try them on each and individual track, try the game's recommended setup, and see what you think. Personally for me, do tend to go for the 13mm extreme cooling version when that brake disc is available. So moving on to another difficult subject of braking, we need to know and understand how to brake in the wet conditions. Of course, braking in normal conditions can be tough, but getting to the wet, the rainy, the sodden circuits can take a bit of time to get used to. Now in MotoGP 24, the braking is a little bit easier when it comes to the wet conditions compared to MotoGP 23. And I would say that the best piece of advice I could ever give you in the wet conditions is just to take everything that little bit more careful, relaxed and calm. It is easy to panic in the wet conditions because of course it is a completely different beast to racing in dry, sunny, hot conditions. So my advice would be to just do everything that you do normally. Brake at similar braking conditions, but brake a little bit earlier and a little bit more careful. Now, it doesn't mean you can't brake aggressively and you can't ride aggressively in the wet, it just means you've got to take that extra bit of care. So braking here, I'm going to go a little bit earlier than what I usually brake into Brooklands, but I'm going to be really careful on the front brake. Also as well, the trail braking mid-corners will have to be reduced. Now, as we mentioned when we were in the Bud International Circuit of the Indian GP, you could use the trail braking and being relatively aggressive mid-corner on the brake to reduce the understeer and go for that tighter apex. Now, that is possible in the wet conditions, but again, as I'm going to have to say it again, you have to be really careful. Braking mid-corner aggressively is going to reduce the chances of you staying on that bike by a massive amount. Now, most crashes in wet conditions in real life tend to happen due to the front end crash, the low side crash where you just lose the front end. Now, the reason this will happen is because riders will trail brake as much as they can to the point where the bike feels like it's letting go, and then they can release. Now, you can't really do that in the wet conditions because of how difficult and how quickly the bike can wash with such a lack of grip. These tyres are completely different to the Michelin rubber you get in the likes of Jerez during the sunniest peak, where it's boiling hot, it's red hot, and you don't need to worry about saving the tyres. You can just absolutely go for it. Here, you need the opposite. You need to be careful, you need to be relaxed, and just use everything that little bit more careful. Now, in the previous chapter, we discussed different types of brake discs here in MotoGP 24. Well, I said that my preference was the 13mm extreme cooling version of the Brembo brake disc. Now, I am still using that for the purpose of today's video. Are you seeing something that I am seeing, and that being the form of that front brake disc? That can be seen in the bottom right corner of your screen now, and as you can see, big blue brake disc means it is too cold for the conditions right now. So basically, my front brake disc is not performing at optimum temperature. Even hard on the brakes now going into Brooklands, the front brake disc still cannot get to an optimum temperature to perform at its best possible way. So for that reason, I would recommend changing the brake disc to something that heats up much quicker, because you're not on the brakes that much here in Silverstone, and it's also very cold, it's very wet. That brake disc will never run at its optimum temperature. So I highly recommend, no matter the track or conditions, check to see which brake disc works best for you in the terms of temperature to work in its best way under the braking. I cannot stress that enough to you. I only use this particular brake disc for the purpose of this video, but I would have definitely gone for a brake disc that heats up much quicker with a small amount of pressure to maintain that optimum temperature for the disc in these treacherous, damp, wet conditions. Now, I spoke earlier about what to do correctly here in MotoGP 24 under the braking. Now, I want to show you a few things now on how others may be braking by using the front brake disc in a very aggressive way. I'm going to try and use the front brake a lot more than I would do usually, and I'm also going to try and implement more rear brake just to try and get the bike unstable so I can show you exactly the difference between the braking styles. Now, I have my own style which is very relaxed and very calm. I also brake very early. I find it difficult to replicate how not to do it because I'm so used to the way, but in this part of the video, I can honestly say when I was trying to brake in a different way by going really aggressive on the front brake, I had a lot of difficulties. And it was hard for me to really show you how wrong you can do it by being too aggressive, by being too much on the front brake, etc. It didn't come across quite as well as I would have wanted to, but I understand and I can appreciate your guys' struggles when you're trying to brake in a correct way. So I do sympathize with you guys, and that is why I've made this video here today. So I do hope it's helped. If it has, let me know in the comment section down below. But here right now, I am trying to still brake in this very aggressive way to show you the difference. So here into 14 for Caro, again I'm going to go really hard on the brakes. I'm going to use that rear brake to the maximum and kind of stop too early. But I know when I tried on other bikes, when I was really just sort of learning the way, I was sending the rear tyre flying all over the place. It was just kicking out, it didn't look comfortable. They look really odd and peculiar, so I know what it's like, but I had a really tough time actually showing you how bad it is. So what I will show you is the comparison of me braking properly in the way that I think's comfortable and the way I think he should be doing it, compared to the way I was trying to depict a moment ago. You can see visually it is much cleaner. The corners are carrying so much more speed, and the whole process just looks a lot better. The lap times I was doing with the demonstration lap of how not to do it correctly certainly didn't work out well. But one thing I can tell you is to be really careful with the rear brake. I mentioned that I'll talk about it later on in this video, and now is the moment in time, because I cannot stress to you how important it is to use the rear brake correctly. The best method of approach to use that rear brake is to use it on the initial front brake. So when you're braking really firm, you're going to be using the front brake at around 80%. Then you're going to use the rear brake just a few clicks, just a few presses, just to ensure the bike stops and slows down as quick as possible. Now on the flip side, if you use that too much, the rear tyre starts to turn and it starts to kick out, putting your rear tyre in a situation where it's no longer parallel with the front tyre, thus meaning a rear slide, which will reduce the tyre wear, instability. It's just not going to be a great experience. Now there are some riders in real life that like to ride that way, and if you're like that and you can do it, then I implore you to go for it. We're not all Sam Lowe's, unfortunately, but I can see the people using it and I know how they use it well. But if you're not using it correctly, it can be a nightmare. So I would learn to do it correctly before you start implementing these stylish sort of ways to get the bike stopped. Always walk before you can run, and that is my advice for you guys here today. So guys, I hope this video has been helpful. If it has, let me know in the comment section down below, and also hit the subscribe button, because I have a lot more guides and tutorials coming very, very soon. Quick recap before we go. Controls configuration are in the description down below. Rhyme accidentally. Careful on the front brake. Gentle progressive pressure up until the point where the front wheel locks. Then you're going to start reducing and aiming for the trail braking, getting it right to the apex, and then reducing before the bike becomes unstable and wants to drop the front. Test out my left analog stick theory from pushing backwards under braking to help keep the rear wheel down, and on the alternative, try pushing it forward to see if it helps with getting some stoppies for some excellent pictures, for example. And finally, use the rear brake, but use it sparingly. Don't slam on the rear brake, because you're going to get the rear wheel out, and finally, you can use it mid-corner to reduce the speed. So guys, thanks for watching. I hope this video helped. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in tomorrow for more MotoGP 24 content. Ciao for now. Oh hi, didn't quite see you there. Good to see you're still here. If this video didn't quite sate your appetite, then why not watch some more DrAce content by clicking the video shown on screen now. Furthermore, if you would like to follow me on social media, you can do so now with the links down in the description. Consider subscribing so you don't miss a single DrAce video.